Good evening, everybody. My name is Stephen Berkowitz. I'm with the firm Berkowitz and Associates. This evening is the second installment of a five-part series entitled Orchestrating Your Organization's Forces to Minimize the Effect of Delay on a Construction Project. I assume everybody who is signed on can see the social stream chat portion of the screen in the right hand side of their monitor, and you may feel free to ask questions or make comments throughout the webinar. I will do my best to address anybody who has any questions or any comments. Uh, but without any further ado, we'll just start right in. This, as I said, is the second in a five-part series, and we're going to talk about documents that you need to establish your position of strength in either negotiating or litigating a delay claim, your entitlement to a delay claim. Last month, we spoke about organizing your forces and the need for the various departments in your company to work together to establish strength in your position of entitlement for either entitlement for a delay claim or perhaps defending a delay claim from a contractor or a subcontractor. In any event, it's always important to be as well documented as possible. And we talked about how the documentation that you have can actually help you avoid getting into a confrontation or getting into litigation about your entitlement to the delay claim. Now, with regard to documents, there's a few things that I need to say. Documents, as I'm sure that you're aware, they're very, very important. And they're peculiar things. It's important that we understand why documents are so important. And we're going to talk about which documents are important and what your field people and your in-house people should be looking for. But before we do that, let's talk about why documents are so important. I mentioned last webinar, that I worked for a Fortune 100 company, and one of my colleagues, when I was working there, asked me a question about documents, and he said, Steve, I see attorneys are often putting things in writing, and I find that a lot of times when attorneys put things in writing, it comes back and it haunts them in the future. Why do attorneys always put things in writing? And the reason is simple. It is to prove you said what you said when you said it. It's that simple. Same thing goes for attorneys, goes for anybody else. You put things in writing because it allows you to prove what you said and when you said it. That is known as a contemporaneous document. A document that is created at the time the event is occurring is a contemporaneous document. It has special relevance in the courtroom. It has special relevance in the construction industry. A contemporaneous document has almost automatic validity, especially if it is a document that is created during the normal course of business. The person offering the document simply needs to say that he or she remembers drafting the document at the time the event was occurring. And that document will automatically have authenticity. Now, let's talk a little bit about documents. And I'm not going to go too far afield here, but I think that there's something that's very relevant that's occurring in the news in this country right now, which shows us the importance of documents. I'm sure people have heard of Eric Snowden. He was that NSA contractor that may not, depending on which circuit you're in, may or may not have leaked information that the government may or may not be violating people's Fourth Amendment rights, the rights to prevent the government from executing illegal search and seizures. The New York court has held that what the government does is constitutional, and I believe the D.C. court has held that it's unconstitutional. That's why I say it may or may not be a violation of the Fourth Amendment rights. But I was listening to a podcaster, and he said, with regard to the Eric Snowden situation, he said, documents, documents, documents. Documents change the whole equation. And a more true statement I haven't heard in a long time. And the reason that this statement is so true is, let's look at what would have happened if Eric Snowden did not have documents to back up his statement. People, the government would say, oh, no, 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 we're not doing that. We're not collecting metadata on all billions of telephone conversations. We're not listening to anybody. Prove it. Go ahead, prove it. And up until what Eric Snowden did, it was impossible to prove. However, if we look at the way Eric Snowden released this information, he first made a statement about what the government was doing. And when the government denied that statement, then he released the documents to prove that the government was indeed doing what they denied they were doing. That action of releasing documents gave his story authenticity, and it obviously the government wasn't too happy about the documents that he released. He would then wait a few weeks and release some little more information. Well, the point I'm trying to make here is not an opinion on whether or not what the government does is constitutional, or whether or not Eric Snowden should be allowed to come back into the country without being prosecuted. The point that I'm making is that his actions show the strength of documents, and without documents, you wouldn't know who Eric Snowden is. But with the documents, he's able to prove what he wanted to prove, and obviously caused a great stir. Well, documents are equally as important in a construction project, and for precisely the same reason. You can go into court, you can go to an owner, you can go to a contractor and say, your actions have delayed the project, and this delay has cost me money. I'm entitled to more money, or I'm entitled to withhold money. Either way, the documents are critical in proving your case, and without them, you have very little strength, and it's very difficult to prevail in this, either an argument or in court or an arbitration or a hearing. In any event, documents are critical. And we talked last month, about the various organizations. And as we go through the documents, we're the various types of documents, we're going to talk about what the different organizations, divisions of your company can contribute to establishing your entitlement. So first, we're going to talk about the causes of delay. Now, the reason that the causes of delay are important is, well, first, people need to know when it is time to start collecting documents and what documents they're going to be collecting. So let's look at what people have to be looking out for. Additional work. Well, that's pretty obviously that if you have a certain scope of work and if somebody adds to that scope of work, it's probably going to take more time. But this brings up an extremely important issue that is often overlooked. If there is additional work, there's going to be a change order. Now, what's critically important is that there are two components to the change order. There's the additional cost and there's the additional time. They do not necessarily correlate. You could have a no cost change order, but the product could take a lot longer to get. You have to ask for the additional time. And again, we're going to use the concept of contemporaneous documentation. If you ask for the additional time at the time that you make the change order, you're going to be able to establish that that's what you asked for when you asked for it. And beyond that, most change orders are going to have a clause in there that basically says this is the entire scope of entitlement that I'm looking for based on this change or this extra, the additional work. Suspension of work. This is an important issue when we're looking at the contract. You must look for the notice provisions in the contract, and if there's going to be a suspension of work, it's still important, even though it seems obvious that if the project stops for a month, you're entitled to an additional month to compensate you, to protect yourself against liquidated damages, but also so as not to increase the cost of your project by requiring acceleration. The documents that establish the entitlement to the suspension of work are the notice documents and various other contemporaneous writings. Again, this is the things that we're looking for in the field or even perhaps the people in the office. A late start. Part of our five-part series is going to be examining a live delay study of an actual project. The issue is going to be a late start, and if we consider a late start, obviously that's going to take time. If you have 100 days to complete the project, and if you don't get to start on the first day, well, you would expect that the time is going to be pushed back. However, let's say the contract gets pushed from the summer months to the winter months. Well, now you don't really want a day-for-day exchange because during the winter, let's say you're digging footings, it may be more difficult to dig in the ground when it's frozen. Well, it is more difficult to dig in the ground when it's frozen than when it's nice, warm, and moist and wet, which is often the case in the summer. Obviously, you don't want it too wet, but that's something you have to be looking out for in late start. Severe weather, again, this is where we're going to be looking to the contract to see what your entitlement is for the severe weather. What are the thresholds that you have to meet in order to get entitlement? A owner of a project might argue that, look, you know that every day in the 100 days that we're giving you to complete the project is not going to be sunny, and you should take into consideration that there's going to be severe weather. On the other hand, if severe weather is defined in the contract as more than 5 days a month or something like that, that should be taken into consideration. And documentation is extremely important to establish your entitlement. Strikes are another issue that not only the delay in the work for the striking party, but also the extra time required. Again, you've got the notice requirements, which are contemporaneous documents which have almost automatic authenticity. Changes in the work, like the additional work, the changes will have a change order, and you should always ask for time at the same time that you're asking for money, if there is money. Differing site conditions, extremely important. Look at the contract. These are things that are potential causes of delay, and you want to make sure that you're letting the owner or the other parties know that there is going to be there is a delay, and it's important that you document your observations at that time. Shortages of labor and material is not only important to let the other parties know that the material or the labor is not going to be sufficient for the project, but it's also important to let people know that this is going to cause a delay and that you're entitled to more time. Contractor slow productivity, owner actions. These are all things that you want your field people looking out for so that you can know when it is time to start documenting things. Environmental issues. Obviously, if you hit environmental issues, there's going to be additional costs incurred. Again, uh, even if your trade or your company is not involved in remediating the environmental issues, it's extremely important to let people know that this is going to cause a delay. Now, why is it important if it seems so obvious that when a contractor or a party in a construction project loses time, why is it so important to put everybody on notice? And I've had judges explain to me that the owner, if you don't give the notice as is required by the contract documents, in the form that's required by the contract documents, the owner quite simply can say, I was not aware that changing this wall, moving this socket from here to there, it was going to delay this project so much, or it was even going to cost money. And if I knew this was going to cause a delay, and that delay was going to cost money, I wouldn't have done it. That's why that clause is in the contract. The clause requiring you to give people notice when you're going to incur a delay or incur a cost. It's to put other parties on notice so they have the option. And it's very difficult to argue that a clause in a contract is irrelevant if the other side can give you a bona fide logical reason that they need the notice required by the contract. So we have trade interference, third-party problems, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with these things. And these are basically just examples of causes of delay. And these are things that people should be looking out for and should be thinking, beginning with the end in mind. When you're creating documents, you're always thinking, why am I doing this? And people do things if they understand why they're doing them. That's why it's important that you share this information, that the people understand the importance of documents. It's not just another task, another thing that people have to do. It is very critical. It's extremely critical. Now let's look at some of the effects of the delay. Seems pretty obvious, but we'll go through a list rather quickly. Acceleration. Obviously, if you still have to complete a project due to other reasons, like an event starting or some political requirements that a hospital be open at a certain time, contractors may endure acceleration. Again, if the schedule is not extended, it's important to give notice as required by the contract documents. Why? Because the owner would say, well, gee, if I knew that it was going to cost me extra money if I didn't extend the contract, I would have extended that contract. And therefore, the contractor is not entitled to any money for the acceleration because I didn't have the option as I was entitled to have per the contract. Lost productivity, when you have when there's a delay and you're required to accelerate or you're required to decelerate, your estimate, it's very difficult for you to have compliance with your estimate if the work is done in a manner different than you expected it to be done. Now, lost productivity can be something that your accounting people could observe in when they're doing their progress payment, progress billings. You can see that there is lost productivity, and that's a delay. It should be investigated, and documentation is the most important thing. Rescheduling is yet another effective delay. It's something that it can really hinder your productivity. Resequencing. Look, when you estimated the job, when the estimating department estimated the job, they expected to be able to do the work in the sequence that made sense to them, basically means and methods. And the contractor is entitled to means and methods. The resequencing is something that your field people should be aware of and should be giving notice that this could be a delay. Unabsorbed overhead unabsorbed home office expenses. This is a typical expense, a damage that is often sought. So some courts allow it, some courts don't allow it, and we're going to talk about the documents that are going to be required in order to prove those home office expenses. The additional field office overhead. Obviously, if you have a trailer out there for longer than you expected, it's going to cost you more money than you had in your estimate. So that's another effect of the delay. Keeping electricity out there, your temporary heating, all this is additional things that you're going to incur in the field. Subcontractors' claims, you're going to have to deal with that. The people who are helping you complete the project are experiencing the same effects of the delay that you are. And when you see these things happening, you have to make sure that you're keeping the proper documents. And we're going to talk about what those documents are in the next slide. Liquidated damages. Again, with every change order, there's going to be two components. One, your entitlement to cost, but two, and equally as important, is your entitlement to time. Time not only to complete the work, but also time to allow the liquidated damages to take a longer time before they start tolling. Extended cost for labor and equipment. Obviously, if you're renting your equipment, if your labor is your biggest expense, or not, I can't say it's your biggest expense. Many times, labor is your biggest expense, and when your accounting people notice that your labor costs are going up, there's got to be a reason why, and you want to be able to make sure that you have the proper documentation to prove your entitlement to additional costs. Coordination problems, missing milestones, these are two other effects of delay. Now, let's quickly go through the categories of documents. This is the important part of the webinar, that we're going to be looking for what type of documents you need to collect and why you need to collect them. The transcript and the slides from this webinar are available. The Moment Group has their email address on the lower right-hand corner of the slide. I have my email address on the lower left-hand corner of the slide. You may email either one of us, and we'll be happy to give you the notes as well as the slides for your use. Or you can just copy down what I'm presenting right now. Okay, construction contract and purchase order. Well, this seems pretty obvious that this is an extremely important category of a document. When your in-house people are looking at the construction contract or the purchase orders, you're looking for notice requirements. You're looking for the times that you have to submit your notices. And we discussed why those times are critically important. There are clauses in the contract, and there's a reason for the clauses in the contract. So those time requirements and those notice requirements are most likely going to be enforced by a court. Now, the bid documents, these are extremely important, and I can't tell you how many times we've gone into delay claims, mediation, arbitration, into court, and we don't have all of the bid documents. And the benefit of having those documents is almost incalculable because, again, they're contemporaneous documents. They show what the contractor was expecting to pay for the various portions of the project. And since they're contemporaneous documents, they have almost automatic authenticity. So wouldn't it be great if after you bid the project and if you're the successful bidder, all the estimating documents go into a folder and they're kept just in case that you need to prove at some time in the future how you estimated the job and prove that your estimate was reasonable. Again, the originals are always the best because they are contemporaneous documents. Scheduled data and devices. Sometimes, if scheduling isn't required by the specifications, there may come a need to use payment applications for scheduled data. Payment applications can be used in a bind to show what you were doing and when you were doing it. And if necessary, they can be used to show delay. Daily project diaries. It's important that your field people who are keeping the daily project diaries know what is not required but is obviously going to be helpful in proving a delay claim. There, needless to say, a daily project diary is just that. It's a daily diary, so it's a contemporaneous document. It's got automatic authenticity. But what do we need in here? I just listed a few things which I found to be helpful is subcontractors when they're on the project, when they're not on the project, when they should be on the project, when there's work for the subcontractors to be done to do, but they're not on the project. And of course, the notification requirements and correspondences to establish that you did communicate with the subcontractors. Deliveries, what was coming on the project, what came, at what time it came, and those are important things to have in a daily project diary. The issues, we talked about that with the subcontractors and when people are supposed to be on the project, but also things that are going to be causing a delay. It's very helpful to have a record, a contemporaneous document of showing those issues. And as long as your project manager or your superintendent can certify or can testify that he made this daily diary on the day that is in the upper left-hand corner of the diary, and the reason he knows he did that is because he does that every day. It's a business document. It's something he does every day. That has a lot of authenticity. Change order and change order logs. what's critical here is the response time. That can be a component of delay in that if you can't get the necessary documentation or authority from the designer, the architect, the engineer, to proceed with your work in a manner that is required due to the changes in the work, that's a cause of delay. Again, if it's a log, it's a contemporaneous document, it has authenticity. So these things are critical. Plan specifications, shop drawings, requests for information, submittals, they all are pieces of the puzzle that should be kept, and they will go into your delay claim as well. Project correspondences. Now, people keep the project correspondences, but if it's a big project and if you have a lot of correspondences, it's worth the extra time to docket the correspondences. What's the subject? Keep them perhaps by subject. Have a docketing system so that you can tell what the issue is that the letter is about quickly. And this will allow you to categorize the letters and prepare them and make them usable tools when you're proving your entitlement to a delay. Job cost reports and estimates. These, again, are contemporaneous documents. They're critical to show what the difference is between your as planned and your as built scenarios. So the bid documents, if you have your bid documents, that's great for showing what your as plan was, and your as built analysis it can be established through job cost reports, and those are usually kept by your accounting people. And going back to last month's webinar, this is why you want to have your forces orchestrated, everybody working together so that your company can be the stronger party in the settlement negotiations to establish your entitlement due to a delay. Financial statements. These are critical in establishing your home office overhead. That's the most important thing. Home office overhead is a difficult thing to argue in courts, and the courts are split as to whether or not the parties to a construction contract should be entitled to additional home office overhead. But if you can prove it with some exactitude, if you have the necessary documents, contemporaneous documents to show how your home office overhead either went up or was extended, at least one step in the battle is won, and that's on your side. Employee payroll records. I mentioned before, your manpower, your labor is most likely not, if not your most expensive component of the project. It's a very expensive component of the project, and these employee payroll records, when converted into a chart, can be used to show inefficiencies due to acceleration or just rescheduling. The manpower loading is very telling in why a party to a contract may have lost money on the contract and may be entitled to more money. Entitlement, it's not just enough to show that you've lost money, but it's important to show that you have entitlement, that the entitlement is real. Photographs and videos. This is invaluable. Again, these are contemporaneous, not necessarily documents, but we know that we've heard the old cliche that a photograph is worth 1,000 words. The demonstration value of a photograph or even a video, now that videos are that easy to take, a lot of people can take them on their cell phone, something that you should accumulate, which brings me to a good point that we're talking about documents, and it is nice to have documents, but we also have to take into consideration that we are in the year 2014, and documents may be saved not only in hard paper form, but they also can be saved through computer systems and the like. Same with photographs and videos. It can be a worthwhile expenditure if you automate your document accumulation software. And there's plenty of software out there which can help you do this. It's if you are performing big projects and if you're finding that you are incurring costs due to delays and your level of success in recovering for those costs is not where you'd like it to be, it could be worth your time and money to invest in a software that will help you keep these documents. And punch lists, these are almost self-authenticating agreements as to where you are in the project or where you were almost completed or what needed to be done and the time that it needed to be done. Claim notices, again, you have to keep them docketed and categorized. And finally, miscellaneous documents, which are important in establishing your entitlement for a delay, are mechanics liens showing when the last day of work was, what the amount of money that was due, stop notices, bond claims. All of these documents can be used to establish project status. Well, that is the end of this month's segment on documents, part of the orchestrating your organization's forces to minimize the effects of delay on a construction project. If anybody has any questions, you may feel free to use the chat portion of your screen and let me know if there's anything you'd like to talk about. If not, we'll be talking next month about critical path and how that's used to establish your company's entitlement to a delay. Until then, my name is Steve Berkowitz with the firm Berkowitz and Associates. We serve New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. We support the Moment Group in helping parties to construction projects get paid for the work that they do and become whole at the end of the construction project. I thank you very much for tuning in, and I look forward to speaking to you next month.